wrong direction, and I think that the majority of the people, the mass, will not be able to relate to it, and we again become a subculture rather than a sport that is for the mass. And so that's I think the crossroad that we're at right now, and I think it's important to go in the right direction.
Well, I think that's a great point, Arnold, and you know, it always begs that question. I'm not so sure there's ever a good answer to it, as to, you know, which came first, the chicken or the egg. Is it the physiques that are out there, and is it the guy's fault for putting those physiques out there? Is it the fault of the judges for rewarding those physiques? If they didn't reward them, maybe they wouldn't be there. And the judge's defense, hey, we can only judge on what we see out on stage. So is there a good answer to that, or is that just simply something where we have to get back to the ideals of what bodybuilding stood for? Again, back in your day, and as everybody pretty much likes, the aesthetic physique.
I think that it just, because they're fantastic bodies, extraordinary bodies, but what I'm saying is that if the judges will give more points or put more emphasis on the performance on a stage and the posing. I mean, look at what happened with the women. You saw the day before. The women were outdoing the guys, I mean, 10-1 on stage. The kind of athleticism that we have seen on the stage by the women and the kind of poses that they've done, I mean, I don't think that we could ever dream of doing those things. But we could. Guys could. And it's the same as in gymnastics. You know, women are not ahead in gymnastics. The guys are just as good in gymnastics as the women. So I think that it's just that we haven't yet paid enough attention to that aspect, which goes back to the John Grimmick days, when John Grimmick did muscle control. And he would beat Steve Reeves. And Steve Reeves clearly was, you know, the handsome and beautiful body, but he could not control his muscles in his body the same way as John Grimmick. And so John Grimmick would outdo him in the posing, not in the physique. And at that time, those days, they paid a lot of attention to that. And so what I'm saying is, it's just that I think the guys should just put more emphasis on the posing and the performance, make it more dramatic, and really train posing every day for an hour, so they are in a condition, they're in a condition to be able to perform without wiping out on stage and having to go through heavy breathing kind of a drama after having done 4 poses or 5 poses.
Well, just throwing it out there as an idea, but perhaps if the vacuum pose was added to the mandatories, that might be an idea to you know, kind of set it in stone that, you know, just like a front double bicep, the most muscular, a side chest pose, the vacuum pose gets added in, and that becomes a mainstay. If you can't do it, that's going to hurt you.
Yeah, it needs to have a discussion, a dialogue, like in everything. You know, whenever you want to make changes, you bring people together. It's not just my idea or your idea. Let's have everyone talk about that. Let's have a discussion about that. Where do we want to go with bodybuilding? Bring all the magazine editors together, and everyone should have something to say about that. And I think that you will see that you will come up with a good decision.
We talked about some of the great old physiques, John Grimmick, Steve Reeves, certainly two that come to mind of early bodybuilding guys that you yourself idolized growing up, along with the late great Reg Park. One of those other great physiques of the early days was Sergio. Man, obviously you competed against, and he sadly passed away just this past year, but I want to get your thoughts on Sergio's passing and you know, maybe some of the fond memories that you had of competing against him.
Well, I think it was very sad to hear Sergio, you know, pass away, because I felt in the last few years it became more and more fragile. Every time he came to the Arnold's Classic here, it became more fragile, and I saw him in the last year shaking and so on. So I think that his injuries, you know, finally gotten to him. You know, you remember that he was shot by his wife several times in the stomach, and it was a very sad kind of a situation. But Sergio was one of the most extraordinary bodybuilding champions in history, and he was also extraordinarily powerful. He was a weightlifter. He was powerlifting. He was bench pressing a lot of weights, and the kind of things he did. I had the pleasure of working out with him for a week, in Chicago. And
Just to give a time reference, this is just prior to the 1969 Olympia?
This goes to 1960, yeah. This was before we competed in the Mr. Olympia in 1969. He and I worked out together that summer. It was like 3 months before the Mr. Olympia. And I remember it was really hot in Chicago. And he had this long sleeve sweatshirt on and long pants. And he would work out like that. And he would be totally soaked and wet by the time the workout was finished. But he would never stop. He would go from exercise to exercise. He would do these triple sets. He would do a set of bend over rowing. Then he would go and jump on a bar and do 20 reps of chin-ups. Then he would go back to cable rowing. And then he would go back again to chin-ups. And this is how it would go on. And I remember that I was almost wiped out after this lat and back routine. And then he went to do shoulders and arms. So I said, well, wait a minute, what was that? And he says, oh, baby. I always go with baby. Hey, baby, I'm doing this is just warm-up. And so that was just warm-up. It was to do this lat routine, and it was like 15 sets, but 5 of those 3 sets. And it was, it just showed to me, and I think to everyone else that watched him train, of how strong and how much energy that he had. And his training method, because today a lot of the guys think about overtraining and they don't want to train too much and all this, but just think about that this was just warm-up, and then he would go into the shoulder and arm routine, and that would then go for 2 hours. And then we would do forearms every day, reverse curls every day, 5, 6 sets, and then wrist curls, and then calves he would do every day, and abs, and he would have a bar behind his neck, and he would be doing this twist, because he was a baseball player, but he did those twisting exercises, and this is how he kept his waist really slim. He had one of the smallest waists. And so it was really a great experience to work out with him and to see what a strong guy he was. Of course, how muscular he was. I mean, he beat me fair and square in 1969. There was no two ways about it. It was just fantastic. He was ripped. He was huge, and his posing was really good and all that. And he was a great human being also. He was very generous. Like I said, here I was a guy that was coming to America to beat him. And he trained with me for a week, and I stayed with him. And his wife and him, they took care of me, and they were like, I was like his brother. I mean, that's the way he treated me. And then on stage, he was a fierce competitor. He would do anything and everything that he could think of, to beat me. And, that was really terrific, if there's kind of a spirit there. But at the same time, there's kind of a respect and friendship.
I was just going to ask, Arnold, how did that actually come about? Because you were coming here to compete against Sergio, so it wasn't like he was a long-time friend of yours or anything like that, but how did that come to pass did he invite you out, or was it set up by Joe Weider?
No, I called him, and I said, I'm coming to Chicago, and I would like to work out with you, because I wanted to find out what did I need to compete against. What was this guy about? I just saw him briefly in 1968, when I was competing in Florida. And so I never really got to know him and what his training was like. And in Weider's magazine, there was only so much that was covered, but you never really got the inside to Sergio. And so I felt like that I needed to go to Chicago and to spend some time there to just watch him work out and to see what does he do to make him so fantastic. And and I always did that. I always studied my competitors very carefully, and to see the psychology behind it, and to see what they're made of, and where is the weak point, and where is the area that could crack on the day of the competition. And so it was a very valuable time that I spent with him, and he was very, very, like I said, very gracious. He said, "Oh, yeah, baby, come on in, and I take care of you," and all that. So we became very good friends after that, and we competed, like I said, and we stayed in the same room because there was some confusion with the reservations at this hotel. And right after the competition, I remember that he came and he knocked on my door and says, "Can I stay with you?" And Frank and I was in there, and I said, "Yeah, we always have room here." And he then slept with us there. And you know, so that's the kind of relationship we had. Whenever he came out to California, I had him come over to my apartment, and we fed him, and we gave him you know, big protein drinks and everything. So we had a great friendship though.
Well, you mentioned about trying to find a weak point, and it was very difficult to find a weak point in Sergio's physique. But one of those weak points that you found was not physically, but mentally. And one of the great old stories that I remembered, always wanted to ask you this, if this was actually true. But in one of the competitions, one of those early competitions with Sergio, after '69, that you guys were involved in a pose down at the Olympia, and you know the crowd was going crazy, of course, and all that. And that you actually whispered to Sergio, "Okay, I'm tired. Let's go off the stage now." And of course, nobody could hear what you said to him. But so he took off. And he says, "Okay." And he starts walking off stage, and of course, you stayed out there and kept posing. So it looked like he gave up and kind of threw in the towel. So please, Arnold, talk to us about that.
You're right. It was not in '69. It was 1970. In '69, like I said, he was all over me. I mean, he's pose for pose, pose for pose. He beat me. He beat me in size. He was much more dynamic in every aspect, you know. And that's why after he won, I gave him a big hug and I told him, you know, you're the greatest. And I said, it gives me something to work towards. And so the next day I came back. I trained the whole year like a maniac. And I knew now, I figured him out well enough that I knew that he, you know, that there was some vulnerability there. And I then used that at the competition. And, you know, we posed. And I said, and the judges kept, because the people were like standing and they were screaming, it was a standing ovation throughout our whole pose off. And they were just, the people just loved the idea of a pose-off because in those days they didn't have pose-offs. This is a new thing. This all came about exactly at that time. And so so the judges kept saying, okay, we need a double bicep pose. Okay, we need a most muscular. We need a back shot. We need a side chest shot. We need this, we need that. And let's keep going for like, you know, a long time. And so I said to Sergio, I said, "Oh man, I'm so exhausted. I said, let's just walk off." He says, "Yeah, baby, let's walk off." And so he took off, and I stayed on the stage, and I went like, "Where's he going? What's going on here?" You know, I said, "Sergio, come on back, come on back." You know, so it made it really look. You know, then all of a sudden the chanting started, you know, Arnold, Arnold, Arnold. And all of this has an impact on the judges because there was no pre-judging per se. There was a pre-judging, but really the main decision was made in the evening. And so all of that had a tremendous impact on the judges. And, but even if it has 2 points of impact, those are the 2 points that could make you win or lose. And so, so I felt that, well, first of all, I felt that I was in my best shape. And Sergio was a little off because Sergio competed against me 2 weeks before in Columbus, right here at the Veterans Memorial Auditorium. And I beat him here. So that gave me a tremendous momentum. I just came from the Mr. Universe competition in London. I won that. Came over here a day later, competed here in the Mr. World competition, beat Sergio. And then, of course, in London, I beat Reg Park and Dave Draper and Boyer Cohen, all those guys. So I was like going from competition to competition, trying to really carve out something for myself here. And, you know, to make myself kind of known as like, okay, this guy this year won everything. So that was the idea. So I won in London, came to Columbus, won in Columbus. So the idea was to go to New York a week later and to compete in the Mr. Olympia and also win that. So that's where all that happened. Sergio came a little bit, I think, after he lost here in Columbus. I remember him coming to me afterwards and saying, "I cannot believe that they lost today." And I said, "I think he was a little too light." and he gained 10 pounds in the next 2 weeks. It was 2 weeks later, the competition, the Mr. Olympia. And I think that made him smooth, because he can't gain 10 pounds in 2 weeks. There's no such thing. Except, you know, he gets smooth. You know, so that's what happened to him, I think.
So you gave Sergio the wrong advices. You know I can't help myself. Everybody knows that one.
Exactly.
Arnold, in '69, in that first Olympia, you faced Sergio. You saw him backstage for the first time. Franco said something to you when you guys first saw Sergio. What was that?
I cannot remember. What was it?
I wasn't there. I was 4 years old.
Oh, a little jab below the
No.
belt. Okay. Just sitting here innocent, and all of a sudden he makes me look like a senior citizen. Go ahead.
I had heard Franco had some comment or something about maybe how Sergio looked, but you know, because this was basically the first time that you had seen Sergio in person as you were competing against him.
In 1969.
69.
You know, first of all, Franco always has a comment, so that's a given. But I think, I'm sure that Franco said something to the fact that this guy looks so fantastic, so big, so cut. I don't think you have a chance today. Something like that, you know. Even though Franco was always trying to be very.
Yeah, I'm just saying, whose side is he on?
Yeah, but you know, he was right. I mean, it was, you know, because that was exactly when I saw Sergio. That was also my reaction. I always wanted to say that, holy, you know. So it was, you know, Sergio was, like I said, in unbelievable shape, and then for years to come after that, he was in great shape. You know, he started then working with Arthur Jones, with the Nautilus machines, and that gave him some extra bulk, and he was like gigantic. In 1971, he went into London to the Mr. Universe contest, and I think that Bill Burrow beat him. But it was a very close competition. They both were in fantastic shape. But Sergio was extraordinary when he was gigantic.
Would you consider Sergio your greatest competitor, or is there anybody else that sticks out in your mind that you would consider a big rival of your own?
Well, you know, it depends on the year. I mean, you know, there were really fantastic competitors. I mean, I remember Boyer Coe was an extraordinary competitor. And Franco was always very dangerous, because Franco will come in, you know, and he will be so ripped, and he became kind of the dragon slayer, you know, because he just beat all the big guys. And I remember the first Mr. Universe contest that Franco won in Yugoslavia. You know, he beat everybody, all the big guys that were there. They always thought, oh, he's a little guy, he will win his short man division, because in those days they had the short, medium, height and tall man division. And so they say, oh yeah, he will win the short man division, and that's it, that's the end of that. But then, when he came to the pose-off, he would pose everyone into the ground, because Franco had this endless amount of energy, and he had the kind of body that every time he did a pose, he became more cut. He became more defined, there was more separation, and he lost more weight during the posing. And so, you know, it was very hard to beat. And so my kind of advantage was that I was taller than him. But, I mean, muscle quality and thickness of the muscle, Franco had the same, and in some instances even more. You know, his back was just enormous. So he was very dangerous to compete against. I had to always watch out for him, because he was my training partner, so he knew everything about me. I knew everything about him. So he was another one that I had to watch out for. But I think overall, Sergio was without any doubt the most massive at that time, and he was called the Myth. And there was a reason for that. I mean, he was just, you know, way ahead, I think, to most of the bodybuilders.
Well, 1972 would be the last time you would face Sergio on stage. Some at the time called it a controversial win for you, but what are your thoughts on the '72 Olympia? Did you think that was just a lot of hype that they put out there after the competition, or did you think it was actually fairly close?
I think it was very close. Every single time, I think that the Sergio and I competed, we were maybe a point or two apart. So it could have gone either way. You never know what mood the judges are in or what they like. If they like just size that year, then it could be that it goes his way. if they like more definition, then they would have gone my way. So it really depends. And I think that, you know, every competition that I lost, which was against Chet Norton and against Frank Zane and against Sergio Oliva, I have to say that each of those competitions I lost fair and square. I mean, even though I was complaining about it when it happened, because I think I didn't quite understand when Frank Zane beat me. How the hell can a little guy like that beat me? But the fact of the matter was he was better. That's why he beat me. He was more defined, his posing was better, I was not as mature yet, and I had to really learn a lot when I came to America from the American bodybuilders. And I trained with Frank Zane then, and with Ken Waller and Dave Draper and all of those guys. And it really helped me, their knowledge really helped me. And I didn't realize that I lost against Frank Zane. And it was not a fixed competition that I thought that it was, you know. So with all of those competitions that I lost, you know, fair and square.
Frank never let you forget that one, did he?
Frank Zane? No, he shouldn't, because this is his claim to fame. I mean, anyone that beat me can brag about it from here to eternity. It's perfectly fine. It's their right. And you know, Frank Zane was an extraordinary bodybuilder. He won the Mr. Olympia and several times, right here in Columbus. And I'm a big fan of his, you know, because he has continued promoting bodybuilding, doing his seminars and writing his books and doing all that. He's a fun guy.
I love the old stories, obviously, the 72 Olympia and all these. For all the bodybuilding historians out there, to us, these are the best stories, of course, because they're real and they're true and they were a time and a place. And you know, we really appreciate you, you know, giving some of those insights, especially to the things, you know, like the pumping iron era, because, you know, they're out making a movie and they're selling books. So for many of us, we always wondered, you know, which is truth, you know, fact and fiction. You know, was some of this for the movie, was some of this, you know, for real. You and Louis going against each other in that 75 Olympia in Pretoria, often talked about as well as, you know, well, a lot of that was just kind of staged. Is it true, Arnold, that you were actually set to retire in 74, and it was Joe Weider that actually basically talked you into, you know, coming in 75 actually and competing? Did he actually have to kind of goad you into competing for that title, or was that something you were still gunning for 6 titles at that time?
Well, and you're absolutely correct. I was going to retire in 1974. And the reason was because I was just hired to play in the movie Stay Hungry with Jeff Bridges and Sally Fields. And so that movie started in the spring of 1975 and went to the summer of 1975. So there was no way, you know, to think that since Bob Raferson, the director, wanted me to go down to 210 pounds, otherwise he wouldn't have given me the movie. So I went down to 210 pounds, exactly on the start date of the film. I weighed 210. And so I felt like there's no way for me to compete in that year. So I should just forget about competition, because I wanted to get into acting and I wanted to do movies. That was my big, big desire, to go from bodybuilding into movies. I felt here's the perfect opportunity, working with Bob Raferson, who did 5 Easy Pieces and Easy Riders movies, and discovered Jack Nicholson. I thought he's the perfect guy to work with, you know, and I should now just put that aside. This is my new, you know, hobby, profession, direction that I want to go. And so that's exactly what I did. But then, not Joe Weider, but George Butler came to me, who did the, you know, the book Pumping Iron with Charles Gaines. It was highly successful. And he now wanted to do a documentary, make this book into a documentary. And he said, look, there is no documentary, there's no Pumping Iron if you're not competing. I need you to compete in the competition. And I said, well, I can't. And so this went back and forth. And then eventually I figured it out that maybe I could compete, but I would never get to the size that I was in 1974, because I weighed 246 that year when I competed, and I felt when I'm down to 210, yes, muscles have a memory, you can get them back quickly in 3 months, but I just felt that I was not going to get to the size that it was. And so, but anyway, I made the commitment then, yes, I will go. After we finish with Stay Hungry with the film, that we will go and start filming Pumping Iron, and I will start training, and whatever happens, happens in Mr. Olympia in South Africa. And so then Lou Ferrigno also decided to compete in that. And so that was for them perfect, because they thought he was on the East Coast, I was on the West Coast, and he was the new guy on the block, and I was then the older guy on the block. I was on the way out, and he was on the way in, and he just won Mr. Universe twice, and all of those kind of things. So he was like, it was perfect. He was the big guy. And so it was like, okay, let's make this like, you know, the adversaries. And so that whole story was created. But what was not created was the reality of the competition and the reality of him working out in the East Coast, and me working out there, me trying to do everything that I could to win, and him trying to do everything that he could to win. But, you know, we wanted to make it spicy and interesting, and so they created this story that he was screaming while he was working out, Arnold, 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 and all those things. And I was out there, you know, worrying about Lou Ferrigno, and, you know, then there's the psych out going on, and then when I meet up with the parents for the breakfast, you know, and we knew that we were going to have a discussion that would be kind of like competitors talk, right? But we didn't know where the conversation is going to go. There was no lines written, there was no script or anything like that. We just put the mic in the middle where normally the umbrella is. We took the umbrella out, and we put the mic in there, we put the towel over it so no one could really see it. And so, you know, the family sat down, and I sat down and did breakfast, and we started talking. But I knew exactly what direction we should go with the whole thing to make everyone kind of like get lively and get into it. And so that's the way Pumping Iron was shot. So that's why we call it a docudrama, really, because then some of it was created, the characters were kind of created to make the movie more interesting, but the competitions and all the training and all that stuff was all real.
So when you were sitting there at breakfast with Louis, and you were eating those eggs, and you were nervous, and it was shaking, you were actually nervous.
Yeah, right.
That was real.
That was, yeah, that was real.
Did you, that was good acting. Did you consider Louis a threat to you at that point? Now, he was the new guy, he was very young at the time, but he was big. He was 6'5", and you know, 270 pounds, whatever it was, and you were admittedly coming off a movie set, you know, down in weight, you know, not back at your 74 conditioning, but you know, you knew you could still obviously put up a good fight. But did you think Lou had any chance, or did you just think you were too far ahead of him at that time?
Well, there were two bodybuilders that were very dangerous, Sergeant Dubray and Lou Ferrigno. And you never can go to a competition and think that you have it sewed up. I mean, that's when you make mistakes. So Lou Ferrigno I saw a year before in New York, and he just won the Mr. Universe competition. And he was so ripped, and he was gigantic. I mean, you know, he was 6'5", and he had wider shoulders than I had, and he was really massive. And for a guy that big, that thick, and that ripped, is dangerous. So then it's the posing. You know, how good is he in the posing? And so I felt that if he makes that same progress as he made from 1973 to 1974, if he makes that same progress from 1974 to 1975, I'm in deep trouble. And especially I'm in deep trouble because I could never reach the 246 that I weighed in 1974. I only got up to 135, and that was it, because I didn't have enough time. So it was you know, it was not that easy, but I was very lucky that year that Lou Ferrigno came in. He wanted to gain more weight very quickly. So he was not happy with maybe gaining 5 pounds that year. He wanted to gain 10 or 15 pounds. And he thought that by doing that, he's going to be so massive that he's going to make me look like a little guy. And it backfired. Because, you know, it always backfires when you try to gain too much weight in a short period of time, because the body doesn't work that way. And so he was a little smooth, and that was very helpful to me to win the competition.
Well, Louis would go on to find greatness, as we all know, as the Incredible Hulk, and you would obviously seek your own path. Speaking of the Incredible Hulk, I've heard that you actually auditioned for the role of the Incredible Hulk, but they turned you down because you were far too pretty.
Well, it's interesting because Tannenbaum was the head of the TV division at Universal. He called me and he said, "You're going to come in to talk to me about the Hulk." And I came in and I met with him. And as soon as I found out that it was not a speaking role, I said to him that my career is going in a different direction. I said I would not want to have a role that is not a speaking role, and I turned it down. He's totally understood that and said, "You have only other guys that maybe are bigger than you." And I said to him, I sent you 2 guys over you. And I sent him Dan Howard, and I sent him Lou Ferrigno. And they immediately fell in love with Lou Ferrigno. They thought he was perfect because he was that big, and that he was at the very beginning. He also wanted to get into acting, and so he was in the very beginning, hasn't done anything yet. So he felt like it didn't bother him that he didn't have to talk or anything like this, because he will get the exposure, he will get the stories out there, and he will be on a roll, which is true. And so Lou took the job, and he did a terrific job with that. The series was highly successful, and that launched Lou in many other directions after that. And Hercules movies and all the stuff that they did, TV shows and all the stuff that he did. And his son, excuse me, Tannenbaum's son, is now a very famous producer in Hollywood. And he just came to me 2 weeks ago because he wants to go in partnership with me and do a TV show about the 70s, Muscle Beach, Gold's Gym, and that whole era. And so it was really interesting to have the son of Tannenbaum sit there and me having, talked to his father, all these years before, or decades before, about the Hulk. So in any case, I was very happy that it was asked, and I was very happy that I could refer other guys to it, and that they choose, and they chose Lou, and I was very happy for him because he got the part and all that.
So on any given weekend, myself or anybody out here, we're home, we're flipping channels, watching TV, seeing what's on, and you come across Predator or Terminator or any of these great films that you've done. And I don't know if this is the bodybuilding rite of passage, but you have to watch the rest of it. Am I right? You got to watch the rest. Pumping Iron, they don't play it too much, but you got to watch the rest of the film. If you're home on a weekend and you're flipping channels, you come across one of your own movies. Do you watch it?
I would say no, but
You would say no, but do you watch it?
No, but I watch it when my kids watch it, and they say, "Daddy, sit down, let's watch this film." I didn't even know he did this film. And that happened many times. And when kids grow up, they're not aware of your career when they're like 6 years old or 8 years old, but then slowly they grow into it and they discover from their friends and themselves when they watch TV that you have done all these movies. And they want you to watch it with them or finish watching it with them. The worst is when they switch channels and they see Hercules in New York. And they say, they sit down and say, "Oh, this is really funny, Daddy. Sit down with us and let's watch that." I said, "No, don't make me watch that." But I mean, so that happened. No, first of all, I never watch TV. Before I go to sleep, I sometimes watch the news quickly, or when I wake up in the morning, watch the news quickly. Then I read the papers and stuff like that. But I just don't have the time, really. I don't know when to sit down and just start watching movies on television. I mean, there's just not enough time to do that. So when you have a family, when you have kids, and they want you to do things, and you go out and you do things with them out there, but it's very rarely that you just hang around at night at home and just sit down and watch TV.
Well, I love watching Hercules in New York. That when you throw the bear through the park, that's gold. That's no CGI, by the way. That's a real bear.
I just wanted to know that every time you watch TV and you watch one of my movies, I get residuals. So just keep watching.
Yeah, because
I like that.
yeah, you need the money.
Exactly.
I get residuals too, but they're not as big.
You're not doing too bad.
Yeah. Well, when they do a Hercules in New York 2, I'm your man.
All right.
But who's your favorite actor, Arnold? I mean, you obviously pal around with some of the greatest actors that we know. Expendables 2, by the way, I thought was great. Anybody see Expendables 2? It had to be a lot of fun.
It was. But I think that when it comes to actors, it's very hard to say who is it. Is it your favorite actor to work with? I mean, I remember when I worked with James Earl Jones and with Max von Sydow in Conan 1. I mean, that was an extraordinary experience to be able to work with two such extraordinary award-winning actors in one movie. And then the beginning of my career in a way. But it's also, for me great to work with someone like Stallone, like we did in 3 times now in films. And the latest one was The Tomb, which will be released later on this year. He's very passionate about acting, and he's really into it, and he's so talented in writing and directing and acting and all this. So it was wonderful to work with him. But I remember I just saw Kirk Douglas recently. He's now 96 years old, I think. And we did a movie, The Villain, in 1978. And I think he was around 65 years old then. And he ran up to the horse from behind and then jumped on the horse. He jumped on the trampoline and then jumped on the horse. Now think about that. He was 65 years old to do that. And he was an extraordinary actor. But I mean, he was a tough guy. And he was in unbelievable shape. I mean, every day he had to come to his room and do curls with him, triceps extensions, and all this training, and then he would go out and play tennis for 2 hours and so on. But watching him work and act, I also learned a lot from him. So he was a really fantastic actor. So there was a lot of people like that I have, looked very carefully when I worked with them. And if it's comedians like Tom Arnold or Jim Belushi, guys that you learn a lot from them, or from old guys like Milton Berle, that I never worked with in a movie per se, but that helped me with comedy and stand-up and being able to tell jokes and all this, use humor in movies. He was kind of like a mentor of mine for many, many years. So I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of people or getting advice from a lot of people. So it's, without that help, you couldn't make it.
Well, you admired Kirk Douglas at 65 for doing his own stunts, but the fact of the matter is at 65, you're still out there doing your own stunts and as much as you can, obviously, for your brand new movies.
Yeah, but I think that if you train every day, and if you do your cardiovascular training and your weight training and all this, I think that you have a big advantage because you're not starting out where you have to say, okay, I have to get in shape now for this movie. You're already half there. So that maybe now the director wants you to do certain things that you have to train for. That's perfectly okay, but I mean, I think you have such a big advantage when you train every day and when you're in good shape, when you go in and then try to do your stunts. And of course, one should not at all misunderstand when you talk about stunts, because I do all the stunts except when there's a stunt where you could get seriously injured or killed. Then you don't do it.
Those are usually good to stay away from.
You stay away from that because there are people that are much better than you are in pulling it off and not getting injured. The stunt guys are trained for those things. So if it is a high fall from somewhere where you have to land, 6 stories down and you land in the boxes, you can do it, but I mean, if you make one little mistake, you miss the boxes and you're dead. Because movie making is so dangerous anyway. I mean, I remember that when we were doing True Lies, and we were doing the scene on top of the roof with the horse, And I'm riding with the horse towards the end of the top of the roof at this building. And it was shot in a studio. It was 90 feet up. And so we built a little ramp so in case the horse doesn't stop, you know, he has somewhere to go. So, and I remember I was standing out there on the ramp and they needed to measure the, you know, the distance from the camera, and all of a sudden the arm of that camera equipment, of the crane, kept crashing down and hit the horse right here. And the horse freaked out and started dancing around out there on that ramp, and there wasn't enough room to dance around or to freak out. So I slipped off the horse very quickly and to hold on to the floor down below, and the horse was above me. And this could have easily ended up of the horse freaking out completely and us both landing on a cement floor down below, 90 feet below. We both would have been dead. And so that's, sometimes you don't even know the danger you get into. Or I remember on the set of the 6th day, when we shot up in Vancouver, we were doing this diving scene. And I was practicing and practicing, you know, and I'm very good at swimming and diving. And, you know, I was diving around, and then I knew here was the place where I get out. And when I ran out of breath, each time I rehearsed, I got out on the same spot. Whoa, those idiots, when we did the scene, they closed the top. And I had to come out somewhere else, but they didn't tell me. So I go back up, and I'm totally out of breath. I get back up, and there was now a ceiling. There was no way of getting out. And I'm now totally out of air. Think about that for a second. And I don't know where to go. And luckily, there was a stunt guy below, and it was as deep as this room is, and the size of the aquarium was like this size. And there was luckily a stunt guy below that saw that, and that immediately went up, grabbed my hand, and pulled me in a certain direction, and I let him pull me in a certain direction because it was just before I freaked out. Because, you know, there's this moment where you say, okay, this is it, this is the end. And he pulled me in a different direction and pulled me out, and there finally I could get air. But it's little things like that. If this guy wouldn't have been there, I would have been in deep trouble, it would have been over. I mean, this is how quickly it goes. So that's why I said, you know, you have to be very careful with those stunts and with certain things, in general anyway. But then when there's certain stunts come up where you know you could get killed, stay away from it.
And the bottom line is when you're 90 feet up in the air, don't horse around.
That's right.
Arnold, give me an example of a movie. You've done obviously countless movies now, but give me an example of a movie that you thought was, you know, probably going to be okay, maybe that went on to be a, you know, a big hit, and vice versa, something that was supposed to be great and just completely bombed, perhaps.
Well, I think that the last movie I just did was a perfect example of that. And that everyone looked at the movie and they thought it was a great movie to make, and the movie didn't go well in this country at all.
You're talking about The Last Stand.
The Last Stand, exactly. So I mean, you didn't. I remember that when we did the Terminator movie, the first one, the studio looked at it as a cheap B movie, and they didn't pay much attention to it at all. And then when it opened up in the fall, it was #1 in the box office. And then the second week it was #1 in the box office. And the third week it was #1 in the box office. And this is how it went. And it became a highly successful movie, and was also in Time Magazine's the top 10, one of the top 10 movies of the year, and so on. So you never really know. As a matter of fact, I've turned movies down that were huge successes, and vice versa. So you just, look, if there's a science behind this, there will be no movies that fail. Because remember that 90% of the movies fail, 10% of the movies make it, and there's maybe 3-4% of the movies that really go big, like Spider-Man and X-Men and Iron Man, those kind of movies make it really big, and then or Avatar and movies like that. But that is a reality. It's really a reality. But you really never know. The key thing is when I pick scripts, I always think about one thing, and that is, does this story sell internationally? Because you don't want the movie just to sell in America, you want to make sure that it does well in Germany, and in France, and in Africa, and in Asian countries, and in the Middle East, and everywhere around the world. And so it's key to big stories, that the universal stories that have that have a clear message, and they're good against evil and so on, and to make it exciting and action-packed and so on.
And you never really know. I mean, you talk about fate and how it dictates movies. Like you say, Terminator wasn't even looked at as anything, and it became to be a huge blockbuster hit. But wasn't it O.J. Simpson that was originally cast as the Terminator?
Yeah. I remember I was asked to play Reese, the other guy, and I went for lunch with Jim Cameron, and I kept talking throughout the lunch about Terminator, how the character that plays Terminator, how he has to prepare for the part, and how he has to really train, and how he has to blindfold himself, and taking the weapons apart, putting the weapons together, and the loading and reloading, and all of this stuff has to be done blindfolded because he's a machine. And by the time that the lunch was finished, Jim Cameron said, "Well, I want you to play the Terminator." I said, "No. This guy has only 27 lines." I said, "I'm not going to play a character with 27 lines." He says, "No, remember, I'm going to shoot it in a way that will, that this will be memorable lines." And at that point, Jim Cameron has only done one movie. Right? So it's not like, okay, look at my track record, I'm going to make it look fantastic. But I had faith in him because he was a very smart director then already, and I went for it, and he was right. The lines, "I'll be back," and noticing, "Fuck you, asshole," and all this stuff became memorable lines and made people laugh. And
That's always a memorable line.
But it's also the way you say it that's what makes those lines, And these were also the moments where everyone in Hollywood said, "Arnold, you're never going to make it because you have an accent and your body's too big, and everybody's going to pronounce your name Schwarzen, Schnitzel, or whatever." And here was a part, Terminator, that Jim Cameron said, "Look, if you wouldn't have your accent, this wouldn't work, because you sounded different than everyone else, and therefore we could sell you as the machine." And so all of a sudden, all of those things that people in Hollywood said will be an obstacle became an asset to me. The accent became an asset to me. The body, and Conan the Barbarian. I mean, John Milius said if we would have had Schwarzenegger, we would have had to build one, because of the body. All of this, so everything became a big plus for me. So it was really, I was very fortunate about that.
And I'll Be Back, as iconic as it is now, I think that was up in the top 2 or 3, I think, of, they had like most famous lines, movie lines of all time, I think, and that was right up there in the mix. Arguably could have been number 1. But that actually wasn't the original written line, was it?
It was the original line, except I wanted to change the line to "I will be back," because I couldn't really, I just felt that those L's, I didn't like.
Kill you every time.
No, I just felt that it weakened the whole thing. And Cameron was arguing with me, and this is, "No, look, let me do the writing, and I let you do the acting. He says, let's not try to change things here." And then eventually we went, after an hour debate over this thing. I said to him, "Okay, you got to agree that I can shoot it 10 different ways. I'll be back." And that's exactly what we did. We set it up with different camera angles and shot it 10 times. So we have one that works, and he picked that one, and it became very successful.
Did you think at that time that would be a catchphrase that would be everywhere? I mean, it's all over the world.
Well, maybe he thought so, but I mean, I definitely didn't think so. And I don't think anyone else on the movie set thought so. Because you never know until the movie comes out of what phrase or what will really catch on. I was amazed. I remember when I walked down on Fifth Avenue in New York, and there was two guys came up to me within 5 minutes period and said to me, "Say the line." say the line. And I said, what line? You know, from Terminator. I said, which one? So it was kind of, for that guy, it was automatic, that was the line.
So you said, fuck you, asshole. That's the line.
But anyway, he said, you know, I'll be back line. And I said, okay, I'll be back. And he said, no, not the way you said it in the movie. You know, and so I said, I'll be back. He said, yeah, that was the one. So then I realized asking for the same things. I said, this line must be, you know, a special line for these people. And then, of course, it became more and more kind of talked about the line, and it became, you know, actually became the #1 phrase.
Probably better you use that line than the "give me your clothes." That probably would have gone over as well.
But there was a funny line.
That was a great line. Well, Arnold, I think you've got to go and start the 5K fun run.
That's the next thing we're going to do, the pump and run competition. Get that started, and then right after that, the Highlands Games, the Highland Games. And so this is, of course, a new addition to Arnold's Classic.
Well, I know you've got to run, but real quick, what are some of the new projects that you're working on right now? We know you've got Tomb coming out in just a few this summer.
We finished Tomb, and I just saw that it really ended up looking terrific. And then the project I haven't seen yet is the 10, which is the police drama that we shot in Atlanta, and that's coming out after the Tomb. But I have not seen it. I will see that in March sometimes, a rough cut of that. But it was a very good script and a very good director, David here, who did after what was it called? End of Watch, thank you.
Just ask the fans, they know.
End of Watch, exactly. You know, so he's a really terrific director, and I'm very excited about that project also. And we've been looking right now at various different scripts for the next project. And but the key thing also is, besides the acting, that I'm very actively involved in at USC with the USC Schwarzenegger Institute, which is kind of a think tank, an institute for state and global policy, to continue some of the work that I started as governor, which is environmental work, economic work, and political reform work, and so on, stem cell research, and those things. So we invite, you know, great minds from around the world to the institute and have discussions and seminars and stuff like that, so to include the students, because I think that's where the action is in that, on the academic front, and to really get students to understand of what kind of leaders we need in the future, and especially to talk as much as possible about post-partisanship, to make sure that people don't continue going in the wrong direction by going too far to the right or too far to the left and not getting anything done. Which is happening right now in Washington. And I can't agree on anything, because...
That's unusual.
Well, but there was a time when they worked together and they got things done, because that's why we are in the greatest country in the world, and I want to make sure that we continue being the greatest country in the world, and that I think that the future leaders have to look at things in what is best for the people, rather than what is best for their party, and so that's what we're trying to teach our young leaders.
All right, well, Tomb 10, look out for movies with one word that start with T.